All right, good evening to our listeners. The time now is 5 o'clock straight up. You got it tuned to KMUD Garberville 91.1, KMUE Eureka 88.1, KLEI Laytonville 90.3, all the buds chilling and grilling in Shelter Cove at 99.5, and on the World Wide Web at kmud.org. My name is Lauren Schmidt. I will be your host for tonight's very special public affairs. We will be doing an end of year roundtable discussion with local reporters. So stay tuned. All right, folks. My name is Lauren Schmidt. I am the news director here at KMUD, and welcome to the end of the year roundtable discussion with a panel of local journalists. I'm joined by KMUD reporters Daniel Mintz and Lisa Music. Hello to you both. And we have special guests Ryan Burns of the Lost Coast Outpost, Kim Kemp of Redheaded Black Belt, Sharon Wolf of the Rio Del Times, and Kate Maxwell from the Mendocino Voice. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Lauren.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us. I want to start by sharing introductions and a little background look to the people behind the news. And Daniel, we'll start with you. You are KMUD's longest running reporter on the local news. So please introduce yourself and share a little background on the work you do.
Yeah, hi. I've been with KMUD a while, yes, and these days my beat is county government, mostly Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission meetings. So I'll be coming from that context when I talk about the stories of the year and stuff.
Awesome. And your audio is a little choppy. Not sure if that's your end or our end, but Kate, Maxwell will go to you with the Mendocino voice, bringing us everything Mendocino. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Kate Maxwell, a publisher and co-founder of the Mendocino Voice. I'm the main Mendocino person in the mix here, so it's going to try and narrow down all the different things happening across our big county. But yeah, I'm not sure if you want us to go into other questions or I can just leave it there.
Yeah, leave it there. We'll come back to Mendocino. There's a lot to cover in Mendocino this year. I want to go to a lady who really doesn't need an introduction, Kim Kemp of the Redheaded Black Belt, local celebrity reporter. Hi, Kim. Oh, Kim, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm not used to Zoom meetings. Hi, can you hear me now?
I can. How's it going, Kim?
I'm doing good.
Hey, so many of us utilize kimkemp.com, and a lot of people I think want to know who is Kim Kemp, and if you just want to share a little introduction as who you are and how you first became a journalist.
Let's see. I am a black belt. I was a teacher and I wanted to write a book. So I thought I'll get out all the crappy writing online. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea, but I thought I would. And so I started my own website where I thought I would write like little soccer mom vignettes. And then news happened and I started covering the news, and Lost Coast Outpost picked me up to do some work for them. And I learned a lot. And then I moved out on my own.
So, redheaded black belt, you are a redheaded black belt.
I'm a gray-haired fat butt sitting in my chair. But yeah, I used to be a black belt and I used to have red hair.
Well, we appreciate all that you do and taking the time to join us. One of your kind of co-conspirators is also here, Lisa Music, who is also a KMUD News co-conspirator. How's it going, Lisa?
everyone. I'm Lisa Music. I'm the assistant news director at KMUD News and a freelance reporter for Redhead Black Belt. Lauren and Kim actually conspired, their co-conspirators, to bring me in and share resources here in Southern Humboldt, covering what we can here. And I don't currently have a specific beat, just trying to cover everything as it happens. But my passion lies in cold case reporting. So I'm super happy to be here. Thanks, Lauren.
Yes, and there were some major breakthroughs this year we'll discuss. Thanks, Lisa. And Ryan Burns. Ryan, I think some of your journalist has to be my favorite. I really appreciate Lost Coast Outpost and the work you do. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Thanks, Lauren. Yep, my name's Ryan Burns. I have been a local reporter for, I was trying to count, I think 16 or 17 years now. I've been at the Lost Coast Outpost for the last 10 of those. Prior to that, I was at the North Coast Journal. And prior to that, I was at the Times Standard back when it was engaged in the newspaper war with the Eureka Reporter, which was pretty exciting. But yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And last but certainly not least, Sharon Wolf of the Rio Del Times. How's it going, Sharon?
Hi, it's going pretty well, thank you. My husband and I began the Rio Del Times in 2005 when we were fighting with the city over a house that we had purchased in the city. And we discovered the hardest thing to find around here was information. It was really difficult. And so we started recording and broadcasting the city council meetings online years before the city would agree to doing it themselves. And so that's where we began. And we started publishing as much information, public information that we can get out there in order to, let people have access to it, but also to build the archive of information, because that's really important. We have years of tapes of city council meetings that don't exist anywhere else. And I don't know whoever is going to want this stuff, but if you ever did, we've got it.
Sharon, I want to stay with you for a minute because as we were reflecting on the beginning of the year, it literally started with a bang, like just a handful of hours into 2023, we had another pretty major earthquake. I mean, we had the December 20th magnitude 6.4, but then on New Year's Day, there was another earthquake. And you cover all things Rio Del and you live in Rio Del. Can you just talk about those months, going into 2023 and the first kind of months of recovery?
Oh, it's been unreal when the story is brought to you in that way, boy. Yeah, New Year's Day, the second earthquake actually did a lot more damage to a lot of properties than the original earthquake because it came from a different direction. So as a lot of people said, anything that didn't break in the first thing got broken in the second one. And so it was tremendous. And the outpouring that we got in Rio Del from the community immediately flooding into the area with food and water and porta potties and all these things was tremendous because you see it on the news all the time in disaster areas, but to see it in person firsthand, and a lot of the disaster response workers are people that I know from my years working with the county. So it was just tremendous. The recovery is going to take a very long time. Our house, which is also our studio, is yellow tagged. And this is going to take quite a while. We live next door to the poster child of the earthquake, that tan house that fell off the foundation. That's our next door neighbor. And our house is almost identical, but we didn't suffer that same kind of damage. But it's with us every day. And when a large truck drives by too fast and it shakes the house, you realize you still haven't quite gotten over it.
Absolutely. And we actually ran a story you sent. It was actually an op-ed about recovery and how rural communities kind of get the short end of the stick when it comes to federal assistance. And Kate, I want to go to you on this because I know we saw this in Mendocino County as well. We went from that earthquake, which I don't think Mendocino County was as impacted, straight into, what we can joke now, snowpocalypse, right? I mean, but all jokes aside, like every major highway was closed. thousands of trees were down. And I know Mendocino County staff were working really hard to try to get emergency assistance. Can you talk about your coverage during, when it literally seemed like all hell was breaking loose?
Yeah, I was also reflecting on how the year started last year, and I think I just around this time of year was looking forward to a slower season where we'd be able to take on bigger projects. And instead, it just kind of turned into from right before New Year's through March, those series of atmospheric rivers that, were both extreme historic snowstorms inland, but on the coast ended up being also a lot of flooding and significant damage. And so, um, I think we were ended up doing just kind of daily breaking coverage. As I was looking back, there, was both that need for information from everyone, including our local agencies who are our friends and neighbors, and also got stuck in various places or couldn't communicate with elders up on the mountain. And so, there was just kind of a constant need for people to figure out how they could actually get to town and what resources were available and when power might be restored. But then also, those, as Sharon mentioned, those bigger long-term impacts where effectively from Point Arena to here at Creekside in Willits, where a whole community of people effectively had to relocate because of a sinkhole. There's been some really long-term ongoing efforts that will take years to come back from. But I think one of the things that we always try and look for in these moments of, there's the breaking news that you want to get to people as it's happening. But I think there was also a lot of really inspiring efforts of people and communities coming together to figure out solutions, whether or not the actual assistance was coming from elsewhere or whether or not people just figured out what equipment they had at home to start clearing roads for neighbors. I think that was one of the things looking back that was really helped our staff be able to get through the constant road opening, closing, and everything else piece of it. So.
Absolutely. There was a lot of triage going on, and especially being, local journalists who are embedded in our communities. We were getting those phone calls from elders who were snowed in and, trying to report the news, but then also trying to help our community. There was a lot of that going on. And especially here on the North Coast, from Mendocino to the Oregon border, I feel like we go from one emergency to another, right? It was like earthquake to the snowstorm to fires. We can't really catch a break, which is why the work we do is so critical in our small communities. As we just stated, that the rural, lower income communities really get kind of the short end of the stick during disasters. Before we go to some of the other highlights from this year, I want to open it up to everyone to see if you could share some insights on your coverage during emergencies, what that looks like. Because, we have our day-to-day, here at KMUD News, we produce our local newscast, but then during emergencies, there's a lot of other kind of added stressors and information coming out, like drinking water from a fire hydrant. I wonder if you all could just briefly comment on what your processes look like behind the scenes during these, catastrophic events that we've experienced here on the North Coast.
I'll weigh in a little bit. During the earthquake and some of the other natural disasters we've had, the internet connectivity has gone down. I know that happened during the earthquake that we've been talking about, but I've had to resort to posting up at the firehouse here in Eureka because they, as an emergency service, they maintain their own internet. So yeah, I think it's also Lost Coast Communications also owns 4 radio stations, and so it's helpful to have people who are on the air, taking calls, and also, us not having a print product, I think helps that we're able to devote all of our resources to getting news out as quickly as possible when there's some type of emergency situation.
I'll jump in. I
Go
think
for it.
one of the things, and Lauren, you can attest to this, is that we're also community members here. So when those emergencies strike our communities, just like with Sharon, it strikes us. Lauren was snowed in, I think, for a week and a half or 2 weeks. The earthquakes impacted all of us, the winter storms, like Ryan said, internet problems, whatnot. When the power goes out, we lose power as well. Luckily, Kim is off grid, so she's sitting up there happy as a lamb, and I'm down here with PG&E. And so I think that it's really important to have those emergency backups. And thanks for the tip about that fire hall, Ryan. I live across from a fire hall, so if that happens again, I'm heading that way. And I think there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that listeners, readers don't really understand, including that need to be able to get that information out. And I know with KMUD, with the snowstorms, we were buried. We had generators that, we have emergency contingency plans upon contingency plans. And that was severe enough that all of, plan A, B, and C were, failing at that point. And so we really had to think outside the box and, hopefully add some more tools into our toolbox there for instances when, hopefully we're going to have a nice, smooth transition into the new year, unlike last year.
Yeah, shout out to the community member who took a snowmobile up to our transmitter site on Pratt Mountain to get the generator started when it just decided to stop during the emergency. Going into the rest of the year, I mean, it's just nonstop, y'all. We live kind of in a wild area, as small and rural as it might be. There's a lot going on. Daniel, I want to go to you real quick. You cover local government, never a dull moment in the supervisors' chambers. Can you just kind of share some of the highlights and top stories you've covered?
Sure. How's my audio? Is it any better?
It's a little choppy, but let's roll with it.
Okay. Well, it's been an eventful year for the cannabis industry with the emergence and debate on Measure A. And, Supervisor Rex Bone colorfully said that this could put cannabis farmers in a mass grave. And the industry still hasn't really emerged from its slump. As of July 2023, the wholesale California price of cannabis was $765 a pound, and that's down from $1,500 a pound in July of 2021. And the lack of improvement is shown in the level of the reinstatement of the cannabis excise tax, which is only going to be at a 10% level this year. So cannabis has been a weighty item for the supervisors. The housing crisis has been talked about a lot during planning commission meetings, and something there that I think is notable is that a couple planning commissioners talk about their housing struggles. One commissioner said he left Humboldt County for a year to do temporary work, and when he came back, it took him 3 months to find a place to rent. So that's a big story. Supervisors have also been concerned with what they call fighting hate. There's been a couple of resolutions that have been called stands against hate, a couple proclamations. And some supervisors during those proceedings talked about how some people in the community are actually feeling afraid, and they felt a desire to respond to it. And I don't know how clear my audio is, but those are some things that come to mind.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many directions we could go on that. Speaking about kind of the rise in hate, I mean, so much of what we've seen locally is kind of a microcosm of national issues. I mean, for whatever reason, the alt-right kind of fascist regime targeting LGBTQIA plus and specifically trans individuals really seems to be peaking nationally. And we saw that locally, which was really heightened kind of in Ferndale, and with the cancellation of an all ages drag show and so much quote unquote culture wars there. But so many people, I think, really stepped up to condemn the hate speech and hateful actions. I mean, Queer Humboldt and the Wiat tribe have been leading the way on that, and it's been amazing. And Eureka actually named a drag queen, Ultra Pain, as its Artist of the Year. So that's been kind of a positive twist. And I know also at the beginning of the year started with the abortion bans, right? That's wild. And I know locally we saw Planned Parenthood Northern California step up to welcome women from other states who are seeking the medical care they need and deserve. And one of the stories we covered this year that really got a lot of attention was that the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office was accused of sharing license plate data with law enforcement in anti-abortion states. A story we're actually hoping to get out tomorrow is that the Attorney General sent a memo to local law enforcement folks in California saying, nope, that's against the law. That's a violation of privacy. So women in, Texas or Idaho who are coming to California to get that health care won't be prosecuted. Yeah, so much going on. I mean, where in the world do we begin? So maybe we'll go kind of in a roundtable here and talk about the top 5 stories you think you're proud to have covered this year. Lisa, let's go with you.
I knew you were going to pick me first. Dang. I guess I would say the shooting in Trinity Pines of the legal farmer's dog. That was quite big, and it was a task. Actually, the three of us, Lauren, Kim, and I, worked in tandem together to get that story out and just really do it justice. And I think that for me it was reporting on all of those topics. It's just really important to try to give a voice to all the sides involved, and at the same time share what's up. And like Daniel said, the cannabis industry is imploding, and this kind of really just seemed like salt in the wound of someone who had just been on the state side, applauded and awarded a grant for their work within their watershed, and then Trinity County sheriffs were then raiding them, which stems back to the issues within Trinity County and lawsuits about their cannabis initiative, and how local control has really impacted cannabis farmers in different regions, differently based on that local control. And that was a really big story and a really important story that I felt a huge responsibility to get right. So for me, I think that would maybe be top up there.
Yeah, cannabis definitely remains stigmatized. I mean, Lisa and Kim, we both covered instance, gosh, I believe it was this year. Oh nope, it was last cultivation season, but where we saw, CDFW law enforcement officials show up armed and unannounced to licensed cultivators, basically convinced they're stealing water from the Redwood Creek watershed. No evidence was found to the best of my knowledge, but we do know that there's active timber harvest plans in that watershed, yet we're not seeing, armed, unannounced law enforcement personnel inspecting THPs. So definitely still stigmatized. Kate, what were some of your top stories this year?
I'm in the process of putting together a sort of looking back at the year article that I'm hoping to get out tomorrow, and am having a hard time getting it down to 5 a month. So this is a doozy of a question, and actually, there's things that you all have mentioned that I'm now like adding to the list. So, I think certainly for us, the storms and then subsequent and heat waves and emergency coverage overall is always a big part of our work. And one of the things that we ended up doing this year, aside from being able to kind of follow along with the recovery process for the people relocated from Creekside and for certain other, really covering the resources available and what those efforts really looked like, was we did a pretty big survey around what people's emergency needs are and sort of what their questions are about how to be prepared, what their concerns are about the work the county is doing. And so I think we were both able to create informational resources based on that, but also share that information and hopefully kind of contribute to the bigger discussion around how to make communities more sustainable moving forward. We also had our county supervisors were hoping to raise public records fees. And that was a big deal that was an ordinance passed last summer, but this May, the county supervisors decided to rescind that ordinance, which, our position all along had been that those public records should be free for not just reporters, but everyone. I think a lot of you signed on to a letter and things like that we had sent around. But I think that was a big deal, not just for us as reporters who are often filing these public records or told to file public records requests when we ask certain kinds of questions, but for everybody out there who also has the right to do that and hopefully is doing that and, sends us those tips when they find things out. So that was a big deal for us as well. And then, I think there are we have been able to do a lot of coverage of food and agriculture and cannabis. So there's a lot of stuff around that I'm really proud of our work and I think was important, but also the kind of big environmental stories that I know, we are a regionally connected watersheds and many other things. And so whether or not it's the Potter Valley Project or other kinds of coastal marine ecosystem work that is happening here and up and down the coast. We were able to cover some of those stories for people that, are really issues that affect everyone's daily lives that I'm proud of, but clearly struggling to be specific and narrow it down. So I'll pass it off to someone else in that way.
Yeah, Ryan, do you want to take it?
Sure. So we just yesterday we published our top 25 stories of the year, which we base it off of traffic to the site. So it's really the most popular stories of the year. And I don't think that they're the 25 most important stories of the year. A lot of the stuff that gets attention is we sort of derisively call it crime candy. It's the violent crimes, the car crashes, the fires. That stuff gets a lot of attention. But I think one of the stories that I thought was pretty significant. It was just actually a month ago. There was an inmate at the Humboldt County Jail who hanged himself in custody, but did not die, and he was taken to the hospital and put on life support. And because he was in custody, Sheriff William Hansel was refusing to allow his organs to be donated. He had identified that he wanted to be an organ donor, and Sheriff Hansel had some concerns about the chain of evidence, And he said that there was an internal policy in his, in his department, his office, that prevented this from happening, that he could not donate his organs. And so we wrote a story about it. A number of other news outlets covered it. And I can only attribute Sheriff Hansel's change of heart to the public pressure that was the result of media attention, because he did end up having the conversations that the family members were begging him to have with the organ donation organization and just the people directly involved. And he, lo and behold, he figured out that it could be done without violating his policy. And so the young man, before he passed away, they were able to save a number of his organs, which saved at least 3 lives. And hopefully the policy going forward, Sheriff Hansel said that he was going to revisit the policy. So hopefully even more lives will be saved in the future. So I thought that was a significant one. There's other big stuff, obviously, the Klamath Dam removals ongoing. One of them's down, 3 to go. That's huge. I think that's going to be a big story in the coming year. As Kate mentioned, the Eel River dam's coming down too. I think that's going to be significant. It should be another busy year next year, obviously.
Save the date, 2028. I think that's the slogan Friends of the Eel River is going with. And Ryan, as far as the organ donor story, I remember there was a moment me and Lisa were in the newsroom and we said, damn it, Ryan scooped us, because we were working on it too.
Oh yeah, that it was really. I mean, I give a lot of credit to his parents. They were going through just an unimaginable tragedy, and they had the fortitude to reach out to media and really advocate for what their son wanted.
Absolutely. And I do want to remind our listeners who have it tuned to KMUD Garberville 91.1, it is 5:32, and you are tuned into a very special edition of the KMUD Public Affairs, an end of the year roundtable discussion with yours truly, Lauren Schmidt here, news director at KMUD. KMUD reporters Daniel Mintz, Lisa Music, and special guests Ryan Burns of Lost Coast Outpost, Kim Kemp of Redheaded Black Belt, Sharon Wolf of the Rio Del Times, and Kate Maxwell from the Mendo Voice. Kim, I'm sure similar to Lost Coast Outpost, you kind of have algorithms that show the top traction stories of the year. You want to talk about those and how they compare to the stories you thought were important?
Brian called them crime candy. I have a different opinion of that. I think that's kind of derogatory, and I think that people really want to understand what's happening with situations that affect their lives, and things that affect their lives are traffic accidents, fires, and crime that happens in their area. So I'm pretty. That's sort of one of the things those are the things that I find really interesting. I ended up with my biggest story of the year actually just happened recently when I got a call or a message at just a little after midnight Christmas morning saying that there had been a shooting on an Amtrak train. And it was the Mount Shasta police officer had shot a passenger on the who was acting erratic on the train, and then it actually ended up assistant conductor was also injured. He was shot twice, and I think that goes to our concerns as this country as a whole. Like police, are police acting in the way we want them to do under circumstances dealing with mental health or drug addiction or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, that great point there. And we actually reached out to the North Coast Journal, Thaddeus Greenson, to join us because one of his stories, the Soth Files, talks about that very issue where multiple times a Humboldt County canine officer, I believe twice, if maybe I'm mistaken, but I believe it was twice, someone was already in custody and then ordered the canine officer to bite. So great work to Thad at NCJ. And great work by everyone. And Sharon, going back to you, Rio Dell is a small community, but 2023 was just one hell of a year for that community. If you just want to talk about the coverage you were able to bring during such a kind of devastating yet resilient time.
Well, yeah, 2023 has been one heck of a year, and I'm not sorry to see it go. The reporting, we haven't done the reporting throughout the year that we would have liked to have done because we got knocked on our butts with the earthquake. To be honest. So the earthquake is the story for the year, and then the recovery, of course, and what's going on with the recovery. And we'll be continuing to follow that for a long period of time. Because the other part about reporting locally on these disasters is it really helps you cope with it. I had a camera in between myself and the disaster for taking a lot of pictures, and that helps. And reporting it and trying to get the information out kind of allows you to step back a little bit. And that helped tremendously. If anybody benefited from the information we put out and the links to, SBA forms and other forms and things that they could get, then that's great. That helped me cope with it. So that for local coverage. But the other thing we've been working on real hard is coverage on the conservatorship system and problems with the probate system that are going on locally. And that's based on our own experiences with my mom, who has severe Alzheimer's. And nobody wants to talk about Alzheimer's and elder care issues because it's uncomfortable, and nobody wants to think about their parents becoming incapacitated. And now, what are you going to do, kid? You have to deal with it. So we're covering those stories. And I found by talking about it more, we are getting a lot of outreach from other families. And just about everybody I've talked to has similar experiences or stories in their family. But again, nobody will talk about it until you can kind of broach that subject. And then these experiences and this reporting is really going to play into 2024 as we're watching conservatorship reform, care court, SB 43, all kinds of diversion things going on, Proposition 1 taking mental health funds away. All of that is going to come into play. So I'm going to have a lot of opportunities in the upcoming year, I think, to do some reporting.
Yeah, back when I first, was a young blossoming journalist, I was always told, report the news, don't be the news, which is a really great tip. But Sharon, you were actually featured in local outlets because you actually overcame a lawsuit where you were reporting on something that affected you, which, there is a fine line. But the court found that you kept to the line. Could you just speak to that briefly?
Yeah, that was really important because it wasn't just suing us as a slap motion strategic lawsuit against public participation to try to get us to stop talking about the problems in the local probate court. They used my mom's estate funds to pay themselves to do this. So think about that one for a moment. My mom and my stepdad, Ron, both need very serious, very expensive care for however long they are with us in this world. And they're using their funds to sue us to stop talking about it because they felt we were mean. So we had the assistance of Paul Nicholas Boylan, who is just the most amazing attorney. Ryan knows him. Lots of other local outlets have used him. Because in addition to being an amazing attorney, he's also a First Amendment champion, and he really likes fighting for small underdogs. Because he knows how important the independent reporting is for cracking these stories. So he was able to help us because without his help, I would have been the exact same as I had been up until that point in the court system as invisible. Sounds don't come out of my mouth. Nobody can hear anything. But if you get an attorney involved and he's wonderful and worth every nickel of it, then suddenly you're getting traction and you're getting people to listen to you. And I'm so grateful for his help. And still, I'm just unhappy that it takes that to try to fight for the causes that you need to fight for. But thank goodness for the attorneys that help us reporters do what we do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Lisa, I want to go to you about the cold cases. When I think of cold cases, it's kind of synonymous with Lisa Music because you've been doing such great work locally. Don't make that face. And one of the reasons we're seeing these cold cases, get back in the media is because they're getting solved due to breakthrough DNA technology. You interviewed Othram Labs and Lieutenant Fridley, who many cannabis farmers back in the day might tremble when they hear that name, but Lieutenant Fridley has returned from retirement. He is no longer in the marijuana enforcement team. Do not worry, growers. But he's actually in the cold case division that was just recently established, I believe, in 2021. Lisa, can you talk about the cold cases you've been working on? Which ones have been solved? Which ones you think will be solved? And which ones just leave you just spinning?
I wish that they were all solved. I think the big one for me this year would be probably Chris Geoke, and that might just stick in my memory because Lauren and I went on a little expedition interviewing people up and down the Avenue of the Giants with posters of Chris. I think for me, the cold cases, the importance of bringing life to people that maybe have been forgotten. And a lot of times we read stuff, and sometimes, stepping behind a lens or behind our computer screen allows us to do our jobs, but sometimes it also allows us to forget this pain that families endure when their loved ones are missing or murdered and they're not solved. There's no closure there. And, most of these cases are, their best hope is justice. I reported on Kira Foley this year, where her murderer was convicted, her body was found, and that was incredibly heartbreaking for her family. And it was joyous. Her mom called the prosecutor a Superman because he did this, and her best possible outcome was to find her body, her daughter's body, which is horrendous on any given day. And so I think shedding light on that, I'm really excited about the work that Othram Labs has been doing. They've been solving some of these identifications. There was a person found in Arizona. I think Kim might have had that story where they found someone that they didn't even know was missing, and they thought he had gone off gold prospecting. And that was solved. So their family has closure. A lot of these families maybe just think that their family member no longer wants contact with them, and decades go by. So that's really rewarding to see that. It's always exciting when that happens. And I think there's a lot of movement. I know there's been movement in the Chris Geoke case with his father being so dedicated and offering rewards and billboards and things like that. And it's always, helpful to be a part, like Ryan said, with the Matilton case, when you see movement or change happen, like, oh, maybe I was a small part of that. And so that's really rewarding for me. And I actually was exchanging emails with Lieutenant Fridley. He's not technically a lieutenant anymore, but I can't not call him that. And he is really committed to these cases. I'm super grateful to HCSO for dedicating resources to the cold case division and really putting that effort out there to get these cases solved, because we do have a lot of missing and murdered people. And a lot of it stems from, I think, our, outlaw culture. And a lot of people don't want to come forward in fear of either retribution or their own security, as far as like being involved in other aspects of law and, illegal nature. In the Chris Geoke case, it was about cannabis cultivation. And a lot of those people, even today, even with legalization, did not want their names used in that story because they do not want associated with it because of the stigma that persists today. So I think getting people to come forward and be able to talk, and a lot of people, I'm sure you all have had this, where people will talk to a reporter before they will talk to the cops. And I think that that's just really rewarding for me. And I really am looking forward to seeing all these cases. And there's little nuggets dropped all the time about how somebody's came forward, or maybe there's movement, and the movement's never fast enough for me, but I'm persistent. So I'm super happy to be moving forward.
Absolutely. And, something that's actually kind of cross counties in Humboldt and Mendocino County, specifically Southern Humboldt and Northern Mendocino, was the missing woman from Eureka who was found deceased, um, basically in the back of her son's car in Willits. We still don't have answers from that case. And then most recently, Scott Graves, who was also reported missing right where Humboldt, Mendocino, and Trinity County all meet on Island Mountain. Mendocino County was investigating it. After a search was initiated, he was ultimately found deceased on his property, and we still don't have answers for that. So, Kate, we'll be staying tuned to the Mendocino Voice for updates on that front. And I can't even believe it, but it's 5:45. We only have 15 more minutes left. Um, Ryan, I want to go to you because when I think of your reporting, I think of the word juicy, like that emoji where you just eat popcorn really fast. That's how I think about your reporting. So much. You cover just such great stories. I mean, from the singing trees snafu, to local politics. Can you talk about some of the more interesting or juicy stories you had this year?
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned the singing trees. I don't know, debacle might be too strong, but the woman, I think a lot of people were really excited that Singing Trees was going to reopen. With the rates of substance abuse we have in Humboldt County, we need all the resources we can get. But it turns out the woman who reopened it has a history of drunk driving in particular, and there were some concerns about the wraparound social services that she was providing. And so I interviewed her and wrote a story about it. And she she really wanted to shape the way the story was reported. I imagine that everyone here has maybe had that experience. So that was an interesting story. And unfortunately, it had a negative impact on Singing Trees. I also, I reported on a pair of doctors who work at really they pretty much run or much of the KMUD Medical Center in Hoopa, over on the Hoopa Valley Travel Reservation. And they were being investigated by the Medical Board of California for pretty extreme overprescribing of opioids. Dr. Eva Smith, in particular, was being accused of negligence and/or incompetence for prescribing dangerous drugs such as morphine, oxycodone, diazepam. And I went back and looked at some of the historic data and found that for many of the preceding years, the Hoopa Valley, the pharmacies there were prescribing opioids at a rate of like 6 times the state average. And there was just we actually had a story today about a woman who did more of a first person report on the impacts that addiction in the Hoopa Valley in particular had on her family, that has received Pulitzer attention from the New York Times, which it's a great story, worth tracking down. But yeah, the state has continued its investigations into the doctors. It's a husband and wife pair of doctors who are the main medical providers at that clinic. So that was another, I guess you could say, juicy story. A story that got a lot of attention, even nationally, was the Cal Poly Humboldt's proposal to put a barge in Humboldt Bay to house students. I think that idea just struck people as funny, but really it underlined a really important story about the housing crisis that was touched on earlier, but it's it's particularly hard in Arcata, where property values are expensive and student housing is at a premium. And there was a story, actually, Thad, if he were here, he did a good job of covering the Cal Poly Humboldt's fairly recent decision to enforce a policy that they had long kind of turned a blind eye to, which is one that disallows students to camp in their vans or vehicles in parking lots on campus. And it just seemed like an especially cruel way and time to enforce that on students who are trying to get an education. So those are the ones that off the top of my head.
Absolutely. And we only have 10 more minutes left. So I want to leave on a positive note before we share our projections for the new year. I mean, there's elections coming up, but was there any good news people are excited about from this year? I mean, for me personally, covering the Wailaki cultural revitalization in Southern Humboldt has probably been a highlight. Members of the Wailaki tribe bringing cultural fire to Southern Humboldt for the first time in over 150 years. I mean, that's just incredible. And moving forward with so many projects, the Eel River Wailaki and Native Health and Native Hands, that's definitely been a bright spot for me. But what about y'all?
Well, Rio Del survived the third annual December 20th earthquake anniversary. So yay, we got that.
I'll throw one in there. Back in March, Jeffrey Woodkey, who is a McKinleyville resident, he was a missionary and aid worker who had traveled to Africa, and he was abducted by militants and held captive for longer than 6 years, and he was finally freed. And that was, he had just an indescribable experience, but it was very exciting for him to be back home with his family. Another one that just recently happened that I think is awesome is that the Hupa tribe I just mentioned, but they reacquired 10,000 acres of historic tribal land. I thought that was fantastic.
Kate, any positive news out of Mendocino?
Yeah, I think I touched on, I think there were some akin to the prescribed fire. There were some really heartening community groups coming together to address some of the emergencies that we had. As one of those kind of high traffic stories we touched on earlier, I think one thing we had happen here is that I've written this story many years now, but Willits resident Edie Cicerelli is one of the oldest people in the world, and she became the oldest person in the United States in this year. Her birthday is right around the same time as my birthday. So every year, for many years as a reporter, I get to write an update on Edie. So February 5th, keep an eye out for her next birthday. But
Is she 114?
Yeah, I just had to look it back up. She is 114 now, but she's lived in Willits her whole life. So it's a really nice thing where it used to be a celebration at the senior center. And then when the pandemic started, it turned into a parade, which has been ongoing for the last couple years. And people of all ages come out and decorate their cars and give her a little drive-by birthday every year. So
Go Edie. And Daniel and Kim, any good news you want to shower us with before we transition?
Yeah, on the economy, there's a lot of great promise with wind energy development. And during one supervisor's presentation, the economic development director said there's a projection of billions of dollars of revenue and thousands of jobs over the project's 30-year span. And that, together with Humboldt State University's transition to Cal Poly Humboldt, and the development of the fish farm on Humboldt Bay, has potential to have a lot of positive economic benefit.
Absolutely. Kim, you're a sucker for some good news. What do you got?
Mine is very personal in that my little fire district, or it is now a fire district. It was a volunteer fire department, became a district this year, which I think our chief called it something about our hippie roots becoming part of the man. I can't quite remember the exact details, but it seemed sort of indicative as the cannabis culture is struggling. I don't want to say dying because that seems too fierce, but definitely very ill, to see our fire departments learn how to work within the governmental system to replace the money that came to them from the cannabis farmers, to get the money, and also to see that the county and the state are willing to help them do that and become part of the system. And my son is a member of the fire department, and it's just so wonderful to see the changes that are coming about as they become part of the system.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank you all again so much for joining us. What is going to happen in 2024? Anyone got some good predictions?
More dams come down.
Well, you're going to have the impact of some of the bills that they've already passed, and the impacts are going to be felt, like with the fast food wage workers at $20 an hour. Those folks are going to wind up finding that they no longer qualify for things like subsidized childcare and other benefits. That happens when they have a minimum wage increase. SB 525 coming along, workforce issues, budget issues. Yeah, it's not good news. I'm going to go back to thinking of the good news stories you guys just mentioned.
Hey, any predictions on Measure A?
I think it's bound to fail. I think it's just based on the feedback I see online and the people I talk to. I think there's been enough publicity and attention paid to it, and the industry is, as we have mentioned, has already been shrinking. I don't think it's going to pass.
I'm not going to predict what's going to happen, but I think we're all going to be covering an election together in a different way for the first time in a long time, because Jim Wood is not running again. And so not making predictions, but I know we have a local supervisor here in Mendocino who has his hat in the race. There's some Humboldt people, so that'll be something to keep an eye out for.
Yep, and we'll be bringing everyone live election coverage on election night and up to the very day. So much going on. Never a dull moment. The news never sleeps. And I want to thank you all again. We were just joined by Daniel Mintz, Lisa Music, Ryan Burns, Kim Kemp, Sharon Wolf, Kate Maxwell, and me, Lauren Schmidt. Thank you all so much. And if you're not sick of me yet, stay tuned for the local news coming right up.